Hello Internet, welcome back to Tromsø Twilight, the channel where I, Vincent, talk to you about books, movies and music that I'm interested in, that I enjoy, or a combination of the two. And today I would like to give a relatively spoiler-free review or discussion of the new film The Ugly Stepsister, which is written and directed by Emilie Christina Blichfeldt. Blichfeldt, I have it on good authority, comes from Tromsø and went to school with somebody that I work with, a friend of mine who I play music with. I was interested to see the film because it had a lot of hype after Toronto Film Festival. Um, I didn't even know it was Norwegian initially. I just knew that it was a kind of body horror take on the Cinderella story. So the film follows Elvira, who is played by the actress Lea Myren in one of her first major roles. Her mother is played by Anna Dahl Torp and called Rebecca in the film, and her stepsister, Agnes, also known as Cinderella, is played by Thea Sofie Loch Næss. Elvira also has a little sister called Alma, who is played by Flo Fagerli. Um, Alma in the film is not really an antagonist. In all the Cinderella stories, you have the evil stepsisters or the ugly stepsisters. In this film, it's really Elvira who is the focus, and Alma, because she's a kid, is kind of in the background. The story begins with Elvira, a teenager, a little naive, kind of sweet, obsessed with this prince who writes poetry, coming to meet her new family. So her father has died and her mother has married to a new nobleman in Swedlandia, which is kind of Sweden. So they're coming from Norway and traveling to Sweden. It's worth knowing that at this time in history, Norway would have been based not even really a place, more like a province of Sweden, and kind of less respected, less aristocratic. So Elvira is already kind of at a disadvantage. She's moving into a new family with a new patriarch. She's not as pretty as her new stepsister, and Agnes, Cinderella, meets her and initially is welcoming, relatively kind. There's no indication that they are kind of a good match as friends or sisters, but there's no antagonism between them. Elvira is maybe a little clumsy in her attempts to be friendly towards Agnes, and there's a kind of indication that Elvira would really have been at a disadvantage in this family because it seems that her mother, Rebecca, is focused on her marriage to this new man and would really allow her daughter to fall into the background or be sacrificed, bullied. I mean, socially sacrificed within the family dynamic to ensure that her husband gives her what she's looking for, which is status, money, and safety within this feudal situation. As at the start of any Cinderella story, the man of the family, the patriarch that Elvira has just met, dies early in the story. So suddenly, Elvira's mother, the evil stepmother, is the head of the family. So it comes to the attention of Elvira that the father in the family, Agnes's father, was actually broke, and he married the mother for her money. But all of this money immediately goes to the father's estate, to his debts and his creditors. So they're rendered poor immediately. At the same time, the prince, this guy who writes poetry, but who it appears actually is in reality very misogynistic kind of jerk, he's looking for his new bride. So all of the young women of the principality or the area want to marry the prince because you marry the prince, you're set up for life. And Elvira has always dreamed of marrying this prince, which works in her mother's favor because if Elvira marries the prince, her mother will become a member of the royal family. So her mother puts enormous pressure on Elvira to become beautiful and to become charming and to be able to win the prince. And at the same time, Agnes falls more and more into the background in the family, the mother begins to punish her, she becomes basically a servant. So you see the recognizable Cinderella story, but it's all seen through from the viewpoint of the so-called ugly stepsister, Elvira. And without any spoilers, a lot of the film's kind of horror and grotesquerie, humor, absurdity, all comes from Elvira's extreme attempts to become beautiful, to become desirable, and facilitated by this mother whose only goal is to situate her family within a patriarchal society. So I enjoyed this movie a great deal. It plays with all of the tropes of fairy tales, Disney stories, from the Brothers Grimm to much more recognizable versions of Cinderella. But it does it in a kind of style that is somewhere between an extremely black comedy and an all out horror film, with other sequences that are quite beautiful. So in a way, like tonally, visually, it might remind you of a cross between like Pearl and The Substance and maybe Barry Lyndon. The comparison with The Substance is very apt because this is really a film about how society's attitudes towards women become internalized and can lead women to go to extreme lengths to remain or become desirable. But the body horror in this film is more effective than in The Substance. It's played less broadly, it's played less humorously, it's closer to reality and more disgusting. And this film is also like less didactically in your face. Like it allows the audience to read the film actively themselves instead of like shoving the agenda and the idea down your throat in the way that, in my opinion, The Substance did. The central performances from all the actresses that I've mentioned are all really, really good. The little sister, played by Flo Fagerli, and Elvira, their dynamic is actually really sweet, and it helps to humanize Elvira throughout the film at different stages, so that she never really, although she's like an anti-hero, she never really becomes like wholly unlikable. You always have some sense of her humanity. What I thought was great about this film is that it made me think about something that I've never really considered before, which is that in the story of Cinderella, the real villain is not the evil stepsisters or the ugly stepsisters, it's the evil stepmother, because the sisters are still kids. So they're really under the wing of this extremely cynical, ambitious, manipulative, and unpleasant woman. And in the film, they do a good job of like maintaining her as a villain, but also kind of showing the desperation of her situation that leads her to essentially try to sell her daughter to the prince. And this thing of selling your daughter to the most available man, that was just an aspect of society before the late 19th century. I also think that it's really interesting to see the story from the Ugly Sisters perspective, because in the story of Cinderella, Cinderella as the protagonist is the winner. So although she has our sympathy, the person who's in the really appalling situation is the favourite daughter of the narcissist, because Cinderella, as being like hated and exploited and bullied, can more easily remove herself from the situation. Whereas Elvira is, because she's situated within her mother's narrative and within her mother's view of the world, and because everything she does is to try to successfully gain her mother's approval, it's much more difficult for her to remove herself or for her to develop an independent personality. The last thing that I'd like to say about this film is just like a little funny anecdote, because the music in this film was done by Vilde Tuve, and Vilde Tuve makes kind of, she used to make at least sort of pop music, rock music. She played guitar and sang and had like a bass drum that she used to kick at the same time. So she was like a one-woman band. Recently, she's started to make music that's more synthesizers and recorder. So she has this combination of like this folk instrument, the recorder, and big synths. And this sound in the film works so well. Like the soundtrack in this film is just great, and it really helps to situate it in this kind of weird, surreal fairy tale space. And it was funny for me because I met Vilde Tuve once. I was in a book club in Bergen, and Vilde Tuve studied literature with the guy whose book club it was. So she was just in one time and like joined the discussion. And the book was Submission by Michel Houellebecq, which I thought was like a kind of anti-feminist and anti-Islamic provocation from Houellebecq, who's essentially a right-wing writer and who enjoys kind of triggering the libs. But Vilde Tuve had read it as a feminist book. She saw it as being a book about the oppression of women, and I remember her saying, I think that this book is written from a feminist perspective, and I'm really grateful for it." And on the one hand, there's nothing about Michel Houellebecq that makes it plausible to me that that's his intention. But I also think it's amazing that she could find that reading of it, because it's like, in a way, she's beating him at his own game. And at the time, I was like, "Oh man, Vilde Tuve. I've got her album on vinyl, and I really like her music, but like, I don't know if she really understood this book." But then all these years later, I'm sitting here on a YouTube channel with like 28 subscribers, and Vilde Tuve is doing the music for this feminist fairy tale film. So big up Vilde Tuve. That's my review of The Ugly Stepsister. This is a film that's either going to disappear internationally or it's going to be massive. It's hard to tell which it's going to be, but either way, I definitely recommend that you see it if you enjoy horror films, kind of more traditional takes on fairy tales where they haven't like sanitized and removed the grotesque elements, or if you're just interested in seeing the first film from an exciting new director. That's it from me for now. Thanks very much for listening, and speak to you soon.